Hello and welcome. You're listening to episode number 48 of the podcast at the Crossroads of the Safe Network, right here at safecrossroads.net. I'm your host, John Ferguson, the simpleton of Project Safe, because not everybody can be a geek. And as I'd like to say, for me, I have some aspirations, but I tell you, that train left a long time ago. I'm not going to be able to wrap my wits down to the metal, but most of us can't. So I'm here to talk about this incredible piece of technology, the Safe Network, where SAFE stands for Secure Access for Everyone. And I'm not going to do much introduction before we get right into the interview, because that's what this episode is all about. I've been kind of promising a little bit, and I realized a while ago that I hadn't really done a really good reintroduction to the Safe Network in a way where people who've been following the project for a while, as well as those just being introduced, can follow and get an appreciation for the scope and the impact of this project. Because those of us who have followed a while and really get it have a hard time. And my guest today is really going to help. His name is Doug Campbell, and he's kind of the point man for MaidSafe about outreach and talking to people and communicating about the network. I tagged him because I thought I would sit down and do an introductory type episode on my own, and it was a hopeless mess. So I figured, well, I've got to tag somebody who I've observed really talking to people of different levels about the Safe Network in trying circumstances. And he's done that. So I'd like to welcome him. Doug, welcome to the Crossroads.
Thanks very much, John. It's good to be back on the podcast.
Yeah,
and thank you for your kind comments there. I'm not sure I totally agree with your assessment of my presenting ability, but it's always lovely to hear.
Well, we were talking about it just for the listeners. We were talking about it, and it's something we really would like to share. I've been podcasting. The 48th podcast on the Safe Crossroads, and I've done a lot of different angles on it. And Doug, you've been around following the project about the same length of time that I have, though you've only been working for MaidSafe for, I don't know how long.
Yeah, just over a year now.
Year. Okay.
That's right. The first time I actually found out about the project was the first meetup that I ran, a Bitcoin meetup that I set up in Scotland back in January 2014.
Wow.
So I've been involved in following the project, probably the same as you from a similar time.
Early 2014, yeah.
Yeah. So, but full time for over a year now.
So we were talking about our difficulties, and actually it was why I decided that a podcast as the simpleton was needed, because before I started it, I had been exploring and on the forums and consuming everything I could, just because it sounded interesting. And then once I got the picture, it was like, oh my goodness. But how do you talk about it? There's no one perspective to talk about the scope of this project easily, in just a nutshell. But we're going to try and give a framework. We actually have observed that we talk about the Safe Network as, well, the Safe Network is this and that. But it's not exactly yet. It's still in evolution. It's still in implementation. But we're going to talk about this is what the Safe Network is designed to be. These are some of the attributes. And then we will talk about the project as it's come forward and where we're at and where we're going. Is that pretty good capsulization, you think, of what we want to do?
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good way forward. I mean, the Safe Network is so vast. It just depends who you're speaking to as to how you can pitch it or explain it. So, yeah, we'll do our best, I think.
Well, good. So I'm going to lean on you to give that first framework. What is the Safe Network?
Well, when people ask me what I do, what I'm involved in, and what the Safe Network is, then I've kind of touched on it there. It kind of depends on what their background is. Are they a developer? Are they a security conscious person? Are they just technology aware early adopter? Whatever it might be. But basically, I tend to always come back to a description that uses these kind of words. It's open source. It's a decentralized, autonomous data storage and communications network. And it's basically a system whereby individuals around the world can download free software, connect their computers, and the whole network is powered by their spare computing resources. So it's new software that builds a new internet that's controlled by the crowd, in a nutshell. And obviously there's very many different aspects of that which we can dig into, but fundamentally that's what it is. It's a way of connecting, communicating, collaborating on a one-to-one basis all around the world. No gatekeepers, no barriers, and with security built in.
Boy, that's several mouthfuls.
Absolutely, yeah.
When you start unpacking and breaking that out. I want to take a brief side trip here, because having said that, you've said that the Safe Network is everything that a lot of people have been aspiring to do.
Yes.
I mean, we've got various approaches and technologies, from cryptocurrencies to different decentralized networks, many different aspects. How is this vision different? Why would we go, oh, well, this isn't just another stab at it?
I think it's different for a number of reasons. There's so many different aspects here which are in themselves, they tend to be the sole focus of other teams. So for example, when I talk about teams, I'm speaking about projects and approaches. So the internet originally was built, as we all know, for connectivity rather than security. But a fundamental part of the Safe Network is there is connectivity, as I've just said, between people. But at the same time, with security, you need encryption, you need privacy built in. That's not something from the original internet design, and it's something that's not unanimous. It's not within the DNA, if you like, of a lot of whether it's crypto or Web3 or decentralized projects necessarily. So there's lots of different aspects whereby other projects might share similarities, but in implementation, there are actually very few, if any, I would argue, deliver or are on course to deliver the similar results that we are working towards.
One thing that I would say on that is the privacy and security and freedom aspect are things that a lot of people really do value, but they're working on putting them in as an overlay, as an add-on, as an afterthought. And that makes it difficult to really get down to core functionality. And I think that's one of the things I appreciated about the design of the network. And in fact, that's probably a good place to take a little detour here and talk about David Irvine, because he is basically his idea and inception of how this came forward. You got a nutshell on that?
Yeah, I mean, David is, he'll kick me for saying this, but he's kind of the genius that came up with this idea back in the early days. So he's been focused on trying to fix what he saw as this burgeoning problem whereby the internet just wouldn't be able to scale for a number of years now. Since the early 2000s, he's had the idea gestating about, well, where are we today? What will happen in the future? I.e., how much data will be coming online, how many humans there will be within a global infrastructure, and how do we get to a system that is has the resiliency and the capacity to deal with the sort of needs that he foresaw the world requiring. So David has been working away on the concept, and originally you can see some early talks actually online from pre-2006, but in 2006 he started the company MaidSafe to focus solely on solving this problem, basically decentralizing and removing these centralized, if you like, pinatas for hackers, for data, for whatever it might be.
I love that. I hadn't ever heard that acronym or that analogy before. I think it's a great one.
Yeah, it's one of these ones. I have a slide of a pinata, and I refuse to stop using it. I've been using it for many years.
I love it. I love it.
It's the reality is, once you start to put things in centralized locations, there are obviously benefits in terms of speed and everything else, but then you have so many negatives. And for some people, those negatives don't matter. But for increasing numbers of us, those negatives are becoming increasingly damaging. And we're all becoming aware of what the problems are. So I think gradually the world is or at least certain sections of the world are moving round towards this vision of trying to see how we can find something that's a little bit more beneficial for us all as individuals, rather than simply just letting our data be used by companies or nations or whatever it might be. I mean, everyone has a different view on this, and this is where it gets interesting because it can be very political. Anything decentralized is by definition political, isn't it? Because it's the whole point is to give control back to an individual.
Right. Well, political from the perspective of giving control back towards the granular level of individual's choice rather than the direction of big corporations and or most oftenly and together corporations and governments.
Yes, I think it's political in an apolitical sense, if you like. It's just this general move in society, and we're seeing it. I was out speaking at a meetup last night, and we got into a heavy discussion around where society is today and where it's going. And I fully endorse or believe that society is moving towards this situation where we're going to have this requirement for individual sovereignty, one way or the other. That could be in currency, it could be in data, it could be in privacy, it could be in any number of things. But the reality is the technology is there in terms of the software, and there's lots of clever people working on delivering implementations of it. The safe network is, we believe, one of the most comprehensive routes towards actually bringing that sort of protection in for everybody, not just for certain individuals. Well,
that brings us back around. David, way back, laid out the basic. He went away and did some, isolated thinking and solving on this, and basically came up with the core structure, at least analytically, and some of the key math of how it would work way back then, before he established MaidSafe, I believe. And that stuff has not really changed, though, as I think I made an analogy when we were talking, it's kind of like all the pieces are there. They just kind of need to be shaved here and there so that they all fit together. And every now and then we find a new kind of glue that hadn't been around before that helps the process. Is that a pretty fair analogy?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, distributed computing, and if you're a computer scientist, which I'm not, but if you've been around the field of decentralized or distributed networking and computing, then you'll see that there's lots of consensus algorithms, lots of ideas about how networks can function efficiently. And these have been scientific and academic research papers and projects for many years. It's only actually in recent times, I believe, with the resurgence or the appearance originally of Bitcoin in a very quiet manner, and the kind of attraction that some of the economic incentives around that whole industry managed to put in place, that people have suddenly become far more interested in this sort of thing. So going back to your original point, David had all of these concepts and, as you say, a lot of the early maths and everything else sorted out in his head from putting himself in isolation in I think it was an Eastern European country for a little while where he couldn't speak the language, just so he would have the time to focus on trying to really develop what a real solution could be. And ultimately, that is, we are still in this implementation stage. There have been changes over the past few years, certainly the past 4 years, but there have been changes for positive reasons, I think, or certainly I would argue, because there's lots of innovation going on. There's lots of clever people who are looking at different things, as we inevitably will keep touching upon. But the narratives being pushed forward, the science, the discoveries are being pushed forward the whole time. And the idea of open source software, it's no surprise to anyone, is to build these kind of foundational steps that others can use. And that's an absolutely core part of our DNA going forwards.
Break that out a little bit. What do you mean by that?
So I think it's just that societal change that's happening, whereby you look at how open source software and innovation has really built upon or managed to creatively destruct other industries going forward. So, the growth and success of Linux and everything else, the open source ethos and involvement is something that has really powered a new approach towards building projects, companies, software, whatever it might be. So I always come back to the story, and I hesitate because I repeat it the whole time. But the first time I met David, it always stuck in my head because he said, it doesn't matter whether or not we succeed, so long as somebody succeeds. And I think it's a really key point that, this isn't just ideological nonsense about what we're trying to achieve here. as a project in terms of our goals, there's many people who want the same things, and we don't need any of the glory for delivering that, but we do need to deliver it. And if we don't deliver it for whatever reason there might be, then we'll have left enough behind for others to pick up to be able to take that ball and run with it.
Right.
Now, I have to obviously stress that's not the intention. And anyone who has ever met David knows that he will be working on this continually, for whatever happens, as will, I suspect, the vast majority of our team. But it's worth mentioning. I mean, it's
absolutely.
Power, isn't it?
I've got to butt in. That is one thing that really appealed to me from the very beginning, was the openness and the vision that was put there. No, this is what we need, is this result. Now, here's some of the ways that this is a path to that. But the end result is what's important, and you see that in David, and in the community at large has followed that lead to my great delight. I've been very impressed with the community that has grown up around this. But it basically is about returning control toward the individuals, and open source is a big part of that. I think we've kind of covered the theory there. Let's break out. This is threading a needle, because the number of moving parts, the number of breakthroughs of actually things that have already been proven. Each of these things have their own intricacies, and the way they interact and work together make it difficult to talk about, as when I did the Safe Network School series, it was really a matter, you got to dive in and get the particulars. You got to start with the vision overall, dive in, get particulars in an area, come back, look at the whole vision, dive into another area, and then you can start seeing how they fit together. So in this short podcast, let's see if we can give folks a bit of an overview of some of the moving parts without, going out of sight in the the details, because you can get very involved and confused by going too deep at any one point before you get the whole picture. How would you kind of go forward from there?
Okay, well, what I tend to do is it's like an onion, isn't it? You start peeling back the layers, and the more you peel back, the more you realize there's still other layers beneath. It's the Russian doll, the onion, whatever the metaphor is.
One area doesn't make sense by itself because it interacts with another aspect of the technology. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. So what I would do is just a really basic overview initially, which would be along the lines of saying that as an individual, to join this network, all I would do is I would download software that would be free onto my computer. I would then authenticate, so I would be able to join a network that has no human administrator. So the concept of secure authentication, self-authentication onto the network, means that you have a single password from which you can access everything on the network yourself, and that network is never stored anywhere on that password is never stored anywhere on the network. And that's a really important point, because if you have a password storage database, whatever it might be, then obviously that's a security risk in theory that could be hacked at one stage or another.
It's not even just theory. It's we have so many examples of that. Anyway, go ahead.
It's pretty much on a daily basis.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's unbelievable, the figures. They just get bigger every day.
It's mind-boggling.
But so that's the password. So what you're able to do at that stage is you want to upload your data to the network. So imagine you're using a service such as a Google Drive or a Dropbox today. Imagine that you then chose instead to store that data on the Safe network. What you would do is upload the data, but crucially, before your data actually hits the network, it's immediately split into a number of pieces and encrypted. So lots of different pieces of your data then, and remember this top level view, lots of different pieces of your data then fly around the network and are stored on other people's computers. Number one, you don't know whose computers they are on. Number two, the people who have those computers with the storage that your data's on, they have no concept of what that data is or that it belongs to you, and it's entirely encrypted. Number three, that data will continue to move around its storage locations as the network evolves dynamically as nodes join and leave, and we'll come to that in a minute. And number four is that you can then, ultimately you'll be able to walk up to any computer in the world, have the software, the safe software running, and you'll be able to access your complete data storage from any place in the world. Now, that's obviously the top level view. Once you start to look at other sides of this, then you have to say, well, why would somebody want to store my data on their computer? What's the point? Where's the incentivization? And the reality is, it's like everything in life. It is about incentives, and in this case, the incentive comes from a token on the network called SafeCoin, and it's worth touching on the fact that obviously the Safe network isn't live yet. We're in Alpha 2, so SafeCoin isn't something you can get today. But SafeCoin is the token that you're able to use to pay to upload data. And why would somebody store the data, as we've said, in a vault? The reason they'd store it is because they get paid when your data is retrieved from their vault. So there's a whole number of concepts around here, which, I'm kind of skirting around, but people are providing storage to the network in return for which they are hoping to get paid. And you are having a place to store your encrypted data that's accessible from anywhere around the world.
I would just inject here that the idea is not that someone has to spend a lot of money to put up resources to do that. It's actually designed to use surplus resources. In other words, if everybody's got some room on their hard drive, and if participating in the network is not a strain on the resources that are existing, then there's no downside really, or very little expenditure to participate in the network. But at the same time, there's the likelihood of earning SafeCoin. Is that
yes.
Fair enough?
Yeah, totally agree. That was something that I should have made clear in that. So the idea being that if you look at the actual percentage of computing resources in terms of estimates that is unused at the moment, I forget the exact estimate, but it's a significant amount. If you think of your own computer and how much spare storage you have.
I love that understatement. If it's a significant amount, no, it's actually fabulously huge in terms of the unused resources, in terms of storage and bandwidth and everything.
Yes, absolutely. And the whole point is that the power of the crowd in terms of pulling all these resources together should be far more significant than anything that could be pulled together by a centralized organization who have to provision, big storage centers. They have to plan that out. They have to plan the capex. They have to do the maintenance. And then, we're talking billions of dollars every year for some of these companies.
Right.
Whereas this flips that economic model on its head.
Good. Let's move on to the next thing. What would you say would be the next thing that we should highlight?
So I think it tends to be at that stage it depends what the person is interested in. So if they're coming from a how does this solve security, then there's all sorts of angles that we could go into, because once you have security and privacy built in, obviously all the data is encrypted, then you start to avoid either minimize or avoid significantly some of the attack vectors that you see on today's internet. So that could be the DDoS attacks or the viruses and malware, whereby these viruses are spread in a viral way between different nodes. Because the nodes are, in terms of where the nodes are and where they're organized within the network, that whole function is autonomous, i.e. the network is the only one that decides what nodes go where and what they're able to do.
Yeah, let's see if we can get a picture of that autonomous aspect. That was kind of where I was thinking to go, and I'm glad you mentioned it. Like I say, without getting into too much detail, how can we give people a mental picture of what actually is going on here in terms of the network managing itself and managing the different resources?
So... Okay, so
put you on the spot here.
yeah. Just I'll answer in a sentence with no more than 10 words.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so in terms of how the network decides what nodes are doing, there's a whole raft of detail around here. So when a node wants to join the network, the first thing that needs to happen is the network needs to make sure that the node is suitable, i.e. it's got the bandwidth, it's got the functionality that means it will be useful to the network. So it goes through a little testing process, if you like, and we'll go into some of the ways that it connects using Bootstrap cache and Crust. But for these purposes, let's just think that a node contacts another node that it's discovered and says, I'd like to join the safe network. So what happens at that stage? There's a number of processes that go on, but ultimately what happens is if that node is seen as valuable and passes the test, then the network itself it's almost like a matchmaker service. The network will take that node and say, yep, you've passed the test, you're suitable to join the network, and we will now allocate you to go and live in a certain part of that network. And this is a really crucial thing for a number of reasons. But the key thing here probably is to talk about the fact that if you were an attacker, if you were a node who was up to no good and you decided to join the network because you wanted to be malicious in one way or another, this is a pretty significant defense because you have no idea where you're going to be placed by the network. So not only do you have no idea which part of the network you're going to be placed in as a node, you also have no idea what the data is that you'll be then storing encrypted, because it's encrypted on your hard drive. So the autonomy of the network, I always like to think of it as it's non-human in the way that the network deals with deciding where nodes are and what they're allowed to do. And by moving around, nodes start to acquire a reputation. So if you have a good reputation, then ultimately you've proved you are valuable to the network and you're doing what it's expecting you to do over a number of transactions, a certain, however long it might be. You, as a node, you evolve from being a child to being an adult to ultimately becoming an elder. And an elder it's very similar to village elders, or the concept of somebody, the old elder who has the wisdom and is able to make decisions. So they're in a position then that they are making decisions about what can actually happen. They're voting on things that are taking place within the network. So it's a built-in way of ensuring that nodes are acting with the best intentions of the network, ideally.
We speak of the network. The network is doing this. Network. That's kind of like saying the planet is doing this or that. We're used to saying, well, Google does this or that. That's a little more sensible in terms of it is more of an entity. But the network is an entity much like the planet is an entity. There's a lot of moving parts. There's interactions. It operates according to certain rules that are implemented locally everywhere, right? Rather than being, when you say the network, it's not like the network decides as a whole. It's just built into how it's designed.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, the whole point is that this is really a dynamic organism in many ways. It might take on the form of software, but it's the closest thing in many cases to this kind of living entity, which will collectively across its different areas look at what's most beneficial to take place in different places and will make the decisions. The whole point really is to remove humans from this process, because right from the start it was identified that humans, we can be great, but we can be pretty useless as well. Let's be honest. So there's lots of tired humans out there. There's lots of malicious humans out there, and there's lots of just humans that make mistakes. So that could be from your Twitter deleting your Jack Dorsey account, or Dropbox being hacked with 58 million or whatever it was because somebody had used the same password that they'd used with their LinkedIn account that had been hacked the previous year. Simple things like that, where humans are a source, it's an attack vector. Basically.
Well, and also the centralized aspect as well. If that network control resided in one place, then that would be a piñata, as you say. Whereas this is an autonomous function that is kind of an emerging, it's an emergent intelligence that occurs over the whole network due to, I think David uses the analogy of an ant.
Yeah, absolutely. And ants, I mean, anybody who's been around MaidSafe or the project for a number of years knows the ants and knows the familiar refrain on the forum that the ants are coming and everything else. So Ants as a lot of the network is actually informed by what happens in nature. That was really one of David's original goals, to look at how does nature react to different things that are going on, what are the external stimuli and everything else. Because nature survives, nature's resilient, nature's strong for the most part. Once you start to look at ants and decentralization, some of the work by, I think it's Deborah Gordon at Stanford, ant specialist. There is a word for that beginning with an M, which I forget at the moment. But I mean, the whole idea of an ant not having centralized control, but the little ants go out every morning and through their antennae, they decide whether they want to be soldiers, foragers, cleaners, whatever it might be. And depending on the number of ants they walk past, who are perhaps it walks past 4 ants who are all soldiers, it will make a decision to be a cleaner that day. There's no centralized control. Yet that's a whole colony, that's a whole ecosystem that works incredibly effectively. You know, you can get many millions of ants in the same place.
Right.
So it's definitely has been an inspiration.
Well, that's good. I think we've done a fair job of giving a kind of a conceptual picture. Is there anything else before we move on that we ought to touch on technically? I guess we should at least touch on consensus, right?
Yeah, so consensus. Now, consensus, from my experience of going out and speaking to people, and just, you know, the caveat is I'm not a computer scientist, as I've said, by background. I've been around a lot of projects and consensus algorithms and everything else, but
I consider your value and mine both to be that we're not.
Yes. I like to think I can dumb things down, but sometimes it's too dumb. So I will caveat what I talk about here with that kind of intro. But ultimately, yeah, consensus. What is consensus? Consensus is this is a term lots of people know because of the blockchain community. We all hear about proof of work and Bitcoin and the effect, the positive effect in terms of reaching consensus, an agreement between different parts of a network as to what happened and in which order, when Bitcoin proved that proof of work is a successful way of going down that road. Now, one of the really key things about the safe network that we haven't touched upon, but it's probably the most misunderstood thing by people who have maybe heard the project in passing over the years, is that there's an assumption it's a blockchain-based network, technology, project, whatever. And the reality is there is no blockchain. And there's a number of reasons for that. And we have videos on this. We have Medium posts on it. But fundamentally, what is a blockchain? It's without dumbing it down too much, a blockchain is a block after which there's a block and then another block ad infinitum. There's a number of consequences of having that kind of architectural model. Number one, every block has obviously a limit to the amount of data that you can store within it. Number two, every time you add a block, the size of the blockchain is getting incrementally larger. And number three, every time a new block is added to the end, it's going to take a certain amount of time, because part of the whole point of something like proof of work is that it slows the whole network down sufficiently to ensure that only one, ideally, miner will be adding a new block each time when it goes to blockchain.
And also that everybody participating in the network eventually comes to an agreement. So everybody has to be recording the result of everything. That's totally a huge bottleneck. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And once we start speaking about like Bitcoin's, I'm very bullish on Bitcoin. I like Bitcoin. I always have done. But Bitcoin stroke blockchain technology is not fundamentally a good use case when you're trying to store vast amounts of data. And let's just roll back a little minute. What are we doing with the safe network? What we're trying to do is create a data and communications network for the world, decentralized. How much data does that involve? Once you start to roll in the Internet of Things, autonomous cars, just the general personal data, the digital exhaust that we're all leaving every day in our lives. That's a vast amount of data. So for a global network, we need nodes all around the world who are capable of taking part in this network. And they also need to be able to come to an agreement. And it can't be this kind of probabilistic agreement that you find from a blockchain, whereby you can always, the consensus can always be rolled back. You know, we talk about Bitcoin, you maybe wait for 6 transactions to make sure you get confirmation before you make a massive purchase using Bitcoin. The reality is it could be rolled back on 7. Obviously, it's a very small likelihood of that. But you can't have that kind of concept of there being a possibility of consensus being rolled back in one way or another when you're dealing with this sort of stuff, because there's so many things happening, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of transactions.
I think we have to point out here that when we speak of transactions in relationship to the SAFE network, we're not talking solely about financial transactions, about SafeCoin transactions. We're actually talking about those things that need to be agreed upon, like to store a piece of data. That's Absolutely. Not something that one node decides upon. That's something that has to be agreed upon. And those kind of actions are all over the place all the time. And in order to have a secure network, there has to be a group consensus of some kind. And in order for that to happen broadly and efficiently, it can't be everybody in the network having to agree. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that by transactions, we don't mean like a Bitcoin transaction. We're talking about, hey, I want to store this data here, boom, etc.
Yes. No, I think that's a really good point. I do tend to talk about transactions just because when you're speaking to maybe people around the crypto world, it's a simpler way to use that mental model.
And that's actually fine, but we need to define it because it really multiplies the scope of what we're actually talking about. It's not just how much money is being spent. It's granular. The SAFE network deals with consensus all the way down to, you want to store this little piece of data that's just a part of something else? Well, that's got to be agreed upon. So that really increases the security, but how do you do that in a way that is practical? And I think that plays to what you're talking about in terms of making a global network that actually can get down to the Internet of Things and personal data and everything in a secure way.
Totally. Yep, I would agree. Yep. So where do we pick it up from there? Yeah. I suppose.
Sorry for the interrupt, but
no, that's absolutely fine. There's so many angles we can go on. I think when we're talking about Parsec, so earlier this year we released Parsec, which I always get this wrong, which I really shouldn't. Protocol for asynchronous, reliable, secure, and efficient consensus, and basically what that is it's worth, if you're into computer science, there's a white paper, there's maths in there galore, which will make far more sense to you than it will to, I suspect, either of us.
Right.
But in effect, what it is it's like a way of spreading events across a network. So gossiping is a well-known concept. You can see it in many different technologies, and gossip is known as the most efficient and effective way of getting a message out across a network. And it's, as it says, one person gossips to another and then updates them with what's been going on elsewhere on the network. When it comes to Parsec, what's happening is we have designed an algorithm that, first of all, it's open source, so anybody can use this. You can go to GitHub and download it and test it, and please do. Is the opening salvo, and
right.
Once we start to say anything about Parsec, but it's a way that you can reach consensus among nodes as to the events that are happening and the order in which they happened. Because what you would otherwise have is you might have a system whereby everybody simply records the events all around the world. Imagine you've got 1,000 nodes and lots of things happening. The time that those events appear for every single node could be slightly different. A node in Australia will be in a very different place, obviously, to a node in Scotland. So once you start to get the order of events wrong, you've got a network that's buggered, for want of a better phrase, I'm afraid. There is an issue because it's like if you get money coming into your bank account and then you try to spend it, that's fine. Do that the other way around, you have a problem. And it's the same with anything else on a network. So a crucial part of consensus is agreeing on the events and agreeing in which order they are recorded. And what Parsec does is it has mathematical proofs to ensure that every node that needs to know about what's going on in the network gets the same information and agrees that it will be recorded in the same order. And that's really crucial.
Yeah, I think it's the one thing we need to point out here that we hadn't made clear is part of the way that the SAFE network, and it's not completely unique, other networks do some similar functions in terms of forming consensus groups that have to do with their location in the address space of the network And those groups have to come to agreement on the actions taken rather than the whole network. And how the dynamics of those groups are formed and changed as nodes come and go is much too deep for us to go into. But I think we at least need to acknowledge, no, the network is broken into consensus groups that together have to agree for certain things to be done for which they are very clearly responsible. And that's how the responsibilities of those things are broken up in the network at large.
And I think it's a key point as well, because when you're looking for a frame of reference, if you're coming from the wider crypto scene, then we're into the realms here of talking about sharding. We're into the realms of saying there's little sections of the network that are optimized to be able to reach agreement on what's going on, but focusing very much on the, what the nodes are involved in within each of the specific areas
of responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what enables you to kind of maintain speed and also make sure that the network is globally suitable, if you like.
Well, now let's talk about what the network is designed to do, what the experience of the network will be, and then we can kind of bridge into, well, what's happening now?
Okay. So conceptually, what it's meant to be is software that can be used by anybody. So obviously we're in the early days and we are continuing to build up in terms of our implementation, what will be a nice user experience. But crucially, going forwards, that really will be, for the most part, will be driven by people who build on top of it. So in some ways, it's a decentralized application platform for developers, whereby they can rely on the privacy, security, scalability that's built into the network.
And the data storage.
Data storage, absolutely. And incentivization models, and there's all sorts of other things around there. But they can rely on this as a structure upon which to build new applications.
I'm gonna chime in from the user's side. Very often people use an application on the network, and then you don't like that one, but Facebook owns all your data. And so how do you change applications or so forth? So data ownership is a huge portion of what the Safe Network offers. It's all your data, and you let an application manipulate it. But if you want to move to another application, it's easy peasy. You're not captive by the application. I think that's a really important one I wanted to just highlight there.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of a really exciting one as well. There's one thing that people who aren't into technology do know about on a kind of a daily basis, or they hear about, and that's giving people like Mark Zuckerberg a kicking in the press for doing X, Y, and Z. And whether that's a Facebook or a Twitter or a Google or any large organization or even a smaller organization, ultimately, anybody who, it's a common refrain. I think we all know it now, but nobody's storing your data for free. They're using your data so that they can build up a picture of your likes, your social circles, your interests, activities, location, whatever it might be. And then they're using that to direct your eyeballs towards specific advertisers. And it always comes back to a slight tangent, but I always think people think that Facebook's useful because, they get their feed with all the things that they're interested in delivered to them. But it's not. The reality is that timeline, that feed that's put before your eyes using Facebook is the things that you're interested in as determined by Facebook's commercial interests, one way or another. So what would happen earlier this year, if you think about the things like the Cambridge Analytica issue, the story, the scandal, I often mention this when I speak to people. It was something like 2.23 billion people around the world that Facebook have in terms of monthly active users. That's a vast amount. Now, there will be some duplication in there, but that's something like, 29%, I think I worked it out as, in terms of the world's population. Do you think if somebody had the opportunity to simply click a button and move to the anti-Facebook, that they would have done so when there had been such a public pushback against that sort of scandal? And our theory is that yes, a large number would have. And one of the things that's stopping people at the moment is simply the fact that your data is all trapped. It's in this walled garden. And it's something that Tim Berners-Lee has been banging on about, rightfully so, for a long time now. So what we've built on the Safe Network at the moment in terms of the Alpha 2 network is we have something that we call Pata, which is a Twitter clone in effect. just as a proof of concept. Not we don't have an intention.
It's not terribly sophisticated, but it's there. No, yeah, it functions.
It just works, or at least it shows what happens. And the point of it is that it's a very easy way, and I know it's kind of been mentioned on your podcast before, but it's a very easy way for somebody to go in to experience the functionality of a Twitter-like type of application, and then to simply deauthorize that and to log into a competitor, authenticate within a competitor. In this case, we've called it NotPatter. And on the first day that you authenticate, you click the button, and suddenly all your friends are there, all your likes, all your social circles, whatever it might be. I think that's a really powerful concept. And this is kind of connects with some of the work that's being carried out to ensure that the Solid project, which I don't know whether we should get into here or not. But
well, there's prior podcasts on that, but Solid stands for Social Linked Data, and it's Tim Berners-Lee's project to do much of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and there's a really great synergy between the two projects in terms of Safe and Solid. So in Solid, you're deciding where your data lives, and it could be anywhere, a server or a Dropbox or wherever it might be. But with the Safe network, what we're saying is, well, you can use that functionality, that search and indexing functionality and that ownership of your own data. But you can put your data on the Safe network where it's secure, it's encrypted, it's scalable, it's accessible from all around the world, etc. So a little bit of a tangent there, but I think it's a really interesting kind of end user use case.
Yeah, indeed. Well, the one thing I just wanted to mention to wrap up what we talked about before on consensus groups and so forth is transactions per second. It was kind of implicit in what we talked about, but people are used to thinking about, Bitcoin, you're lucky if you get, 4 or 5 maybe 6 transactions per second in that blockchain scenario. And others are going up into much, much higher ranges with other kinds of consensus. But the top end limit on transactions per second is not even, you can't even estimate it with the Safe network because there isn't any. As far as I can see, it's only limited by the number of nodes participating, right?
Yeah, we don't have fixed figures on this for a number of reasons, but part of the reason is because we're continuing to increase the efficiency of the algorithm going forwards and the way that the network's set up. There's a lot of variables here, so it's very hard to come out and go.
And, well, we won't ever be able to figure it because it's happening over it's not going through any place where you can measure it. It's happening over the whole network.
Yeah, I think the thing to take away is that there are other technologies out there that are speaking in very large numbers, and I'm pretty confident that we are fairly comfortable around those sort of numbers. But it's one of these things that we will get some evidence on that over time.
Yeah, I didn't want to dwell on it, but it was just It was just a point that kind of went hand in glove with what we were talking about before. Let's leave that there and leave that up to the imagination of what that could mean for people to have control of their data and communications returned to them. Able to delegate if you want to delegate. If you want to not be secure, that's fine. You can be unsecure. If you don't want to be private, you can be quite public. If you don't want to be free, you can always enslave yourself. But on the Safe network, all those things take effort because privacy, security, and freedom are the defaults. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So before we wrap up here, let's talk about what's coming up. You have a number of things here and what people might want to be looking out for as we move forward. First of all, I want to say if you want to keep up with the project, the weekly developer update, which comes out on Thursday, right?
Yes, that's right.
Every Thursday. I don't think you're going to find any project that communicates better what's going on a week-to-week and moment-to-moment basis than the Safe network. Is that fair?
Yeah, it certainly feels fair to me. I followed a number of projects, and it's definitely something that attracted me when I was simply a community member. It's just the level of visibility and transparency. It's certainly something that we, as an organisation, are fully aware of our responsibilities and obligations to let people know what we're doing, and we do that as frequently as we can. Thursday evenings UK time tend to be when the development update comes out. Over recent weeks, we've started spreading that also through some different cryptocurrency apps, etc., with links. So just so that people can get access if they're not usually checking the forum every week, because obviously there's some people that live on the forum 24 hours a day, pretty much, and we are thankful for all the energy and enthusiasm that they put into it. But yeah, there's a number of things coming up. So maybe I'll just touch on.
Yeah, just go, let's go down the list here.
Okay, so when we originally came out with Parsec was a white paper earlier this year, and we had math proofs that proved that it worked and showed what its impact was. The next stage of that was that we had to actually put that into code. We released code, and then that code and Parsec has to be integrated within the routing part of the network. And routing is kind of like the brains of the network. That's where decisions are made as to what can happen in terms of what nodes can do what. So you've got the very lowest level, just to touch on that, because we didn't touch on it at all, which is crust. And I know you do have recent podcasts on that. So it's basically the language that different nodes use to speak to each other. But routing then puts the rules on top of that says, well, this node is the one that needs to speak to this other node or this collection of nodes. So Parsec needed to be built into the routing layer. And part of that whole area of work has involved dynamic membership. And dynamic membership, you'll see, I think we're actually releasing a video, hopefully tomorrow, fingers crossed, just an explanation of what dynamic membership is. And we'll put out a Medium post, as we always do as well. And that's basically talking about, well, once you have a permissionless network, because when we talk about permissionless, the whole point is there are no gates, there are no gatekeepers, anybody can join. That introduces a whole number of different concerns or challenges that need to be dealt with. And one of them is, well, if you have a node joining and leaving at will, or very many of them around the world, then how do you make sure that they're all reaching consensus? Like, how do they all agree what's happened? And how do they agree that somebody has the authority to take part in the next round of decision making, if you like, or continual decision making? So dynamic membership really focuses on that. And hopefully that video will explain that a little more. And then we'll be coming out with the next kind of corollary to that is secure message relay. And this is an exciting concept because it's a way in which different parts of the network from all around the world are able to speak to each other in a way that is trusted. And we really don't have time to go into the details of that. But if you have a node that's in a group or section of nodes in far side of the world, and it needs to send a message to another node that it's never had contact with for various reasons, then it needs to know that message is trusted, the recipient node. So we'll come out and explain what this is, but this is another fairly significant part of the whole picture of making sure that the brains, if you like, of the network work correctly with Parsec. And there's other bits and pieces, but I'll not go into too much detail. But the next kind of big stage will be what we've called the Safe Fleming release. And it was named after Alexander Fleming, who's a famous Scottish physician and pharmacologist. I think he was a microbiologist as well. So if you haven't come across him, he's worth looking up. But ultimately what Safe Fleming represents is the stage at which we will have decentralized nodes routing from home. So at the moment, as we've been building up over the past few years, we've had various test nets. We've been running the software. We've been testing it. In the past month, we've had a crust test out, testing direct peer-to-peer communications between computers all around the world, which had incredible results. For another day to discuss. Well, I think you've actually discussed
prior podcasts. Yep.
Yep. You've covered the lot, John, really. And yeah, so once we get to getting these decentralized nodes from home, then that's a really exciting thing, because then we don't want to fall into the trap of just saying there's just a few things left to do, because that's I would get shot for saying something similar like along those lines. But the reality is that we then need to be looking at putting storage on people's computers or releasing the software that allows them to have storage from home. And this is something that we've done before. We've had storage out, and I know that you remember this because you were definitely involved around the time.
I participated, yeah.
And that was, that's exciting stuff as well. So this isn't new technology in that sense. It's, we're obviously updating and working on different parts, but that concept is something that's been out there before and we have tested. And we're calling that the Safe Maxwell release, which was named after a chap, James Clerk Maxwell, who, again, another Scottish scientist. You can see a theme developing here, I suspect. He was in the mathematical physics thing, and he was certainly one of Einstein's. Einstein was one of his biggest fans. But yeah, once we get to that stage, that's pretty exciting, obviously, because everybody's running their own storage and decentralized routing nodes from home, and then we'll start rolling out, depending on orders, etc. And we'll come back to this perhaps in a later podcast, but we'll be rolling out Test SafeCoin. And then going through the pre-release process of security audit and lots of other bits and pieces in terms of data republish.
So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think we need to really. This is something that people don't appreciate, and their impatience to get to that very, very desirable end result, which MaidSafe has been promising for a long time, and which all of us who follow the Safe network are eager for. I want to put that in perspective, though, of what has been done in the course here is actually really momentous. What's already been done. Okay, we've got things laid out to be done in the future, and it's still going to take however long it takes. And I don't even think we're going to go there in terms of how long is it going to take. I'm sure you get asked that question if you want to chime in on that. But I really do want to put in perspective what ground has been covered so far, and that as much as there is to be done in the future, it is a very charted course. There's nothing speculative left. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there have been significant releases, and I think traditionally MaidSafe has not been an organization that has focused on shouting about these things because it's
I try and shout, but
Yes, yeah. But I think just by nature, the people involved are they're at the coalface every day of trying to carry out some pretty intense cutting edge R&D when it comes to distributed computing and all manner of other things. So it's worth taking stock and saying, well, what do we have today? We have self-authentication that's live. You can log in anonymously to a network. Okay, it's the test network, but it all works today. And anybody who has a forum account, which is simply just a spam prevention measure at this point in time, you get one of those you get one immediately, but after you've been reading the forum for an hour, then you get to a trust level status that enables you to
get a ticket, to join the test network, yeah.
So you can get onto there. You've got the test network. There's various apps out there. You've got a web hosting manager. There's a messaging app. There's some exciting stuff coming out in terms of mobile release, which you'll hear about very, very soon. And there is, we've obviously there's more work to do, but we've made massive headway in terms of crust. It's pretty much done in many senses of the word, because what we have proved is you can now have software that can punch through people's routers or through networks to enable peer-to-peer connections, and that's it's a crucial part. How do you speak from one computer to another computer if you're both behind your own kind of walls? You don't have public facing IPs. So that's all been tested this year. That's a significant step forwards. And then obviously Parsec itself. I mean, we probably were slightly out of character when we came out and talked about that originally in the Medium post as being a paradigm shift for highly asynchronous and permissionless consensus, but we really believe it's a massive step forward. For our use case, it's really valuable, and we're really proud of the work that's been carried out there. And I think sometimes the rest of us do need to gently cajole and push the devs to the dev team in general, just to take stock and appreciate what they are building. But at the same time, it's also important that we explain what this stuff is and why it's important, because a lot of it is esoteric in the sense of if you're not a developer yourself, then consensus algorithms aren't the things that you dream about in the dead of night. You know, let's be honest. It takes a certain focus to be in the nooks and crannies of that. So there's lots that has been taking place. As I've said, we've had storage out there in the wild before. That's something that we will be moving on to. So a lot of the challenges, the heavy R&D stuff, it has been done, and we're always very cautious about saying that. You know, the project's been going for 12 years, but it's been going for 12 years because it's a massive project. You know, I mean, there's so many different aspects here and so many different people across the team to get a feel for how seriously we're taking this and how focused and committed we are. I mean, the team has grown significantly over the past 12 months, as I think you know. This is not a group of people that are going to stop before it's delivered.
Right.
And that's something that's a message that is absolutely crucial to get across, because I think particularly in today's market where you see a lot of these crypto projects are, you know, unfortunately facing some really hard times with the collapse of token prices or whatever it might be. We, touch wood, we've always been focused on, this is an engineering project. This is a project that has to be lean from day one. And we start to kind of scale up and push towards launch and start to, you know, build up resources towards educating, towards hopefully getting more people involved in the community, going out, outreach, speaking to developers, you know, supporting, obviously, people such as yourself, John, who've been working so hard over, you know, 4 years now, is it? I think.
Yeah, well, 3 years roughly? Of podcasting, a whole
3
year
years
before that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge amount, and I think there's such an obligation on us to deliver that we would be delivering anyway, even if we didn't feel utterly committed to the goal that we have in front of us anyway.
I think that's a really good thing to get across, because I mean, as much as sometimes we might want to hype a little bit, it really is based upon that foundation. And so I don't think we need to go into much more detail on that. Those that are going to follow will follow. And hopefully we've introduced things a little bit to give people a different perspective on, well, what is this project involved? It's not for everybody to pile into right now, but if you're a developer, and you understand the impact and import of what's going forward, I think it's worth taking a look. And if you're just somebody like me who gets a glimpse of the scope of this technology, what it will, I'm certain, result in as it's implemented in terms of changing the nature of choice for individuals and groups and different ways of executing and organizing things, it's stupendous. So hopefully more people will become interested and engaged. And at least some people will be informed who may not have been already. Absolutely.
Yeah. And yeah, one final thing just to touch on, because I think it's relevant, is the community continues to grow, which is fantastic, but it's also driven by the narrative that I've talked about, this decentralization and individual sovereignty, whatever that might be. But crucially, the important thing for me was the fact that the Safe Network symbol appeared in the Wreck-It Ralph 2 film a couple of weeks ago, and now I have I have credit from my kids that I'm doing something worthwhile. So
what was the movie, Ralph?
It was Wreck-It Ralph 2, which was I believe it was the Disney film, which was the highest grossing Thanksgiving movie of this year. But all joking aside, I think the fact that some of this technology is now breaking through subtly in different ways to different people shows that something is happening. So yeah, just as ever, thank you to everybody in the community who continues to go out there and is working really hard. If you're developing apps, if you are just engaging with the forum, if you're engaging with us or speaking to other people out there socially, if you're podcasting like yourself, John, it's a huge part of this. Excellent. So thank you to everyone.
And the last thing I want to cover is your recommendations for people who, from whatever different approach, how might they want to get involved. I like to recommend safenetwork.tech as a good place to start. Do you concur? And then what else would you say about people becoming engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. So the website for the project, safenetwork.tech, is a great place to start. Obviously, the forum, that we've actually got a couple of forums. One's developer-centric, and the other one is a general forum, if you like. So the developer forum is forum.safedev.org. And the one that everybody tends to be on the most is safenetforum.org.
And those, you can find those links at through safenetwork.tech as well, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So let's just leave that as the place to go, just for simplicity. There's many ways to go, and if you go to safenetwork.tech, if you're not already familiar with the network, I've found it a really good site because it lets you follow your own needs. I was really impressed with how it was laid out, in the sense that this is such a many moving parts. People have different questions at different points, and that website really allows you to get your questions answered as you go in the sequence that works for you. That's been my experience anyway.
Yeah, and the only other site is the safenetworkprimer.com, which is a community document that was pulled together around about this time last year. So again, there's all sorts of links off there, but if you're just looking for a very succinct summary, then that's a good place to go.
Those work too. Well, all right, Doug, thank you so much. I hope we've done a good job of introducing things for folks, and we'll be definitely talking again in the near future.
Well, thanks very much for having me on again, John, and again, thanks for all the work you do in the community, spreading the word. It's much appreciated.
All righty, sir. Thank you.
Cheers.